the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
Taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
Taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the...
Okay, good morning councillors, good morning officers. I'll like to welcome everyone to the infrastructure meeting for the 7th of February 2023, sorry, and thank everyone for your attendance. I see Councillor Mather's probably just caught in the traffic and heading over this morning, but we'll do that. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet today, the Darumbal people, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Extend that respect to our neighbouring Aboriginal peoples within our local government area, the Gungaloo Nation people, the Barada, Cabelbarra and Yetamarala people. Also acknowledge the Torres Strait Islander peoples whose lands are in the Torres Strait but who live and work on Aboriginal land. Councillors, just before we start, I'd just like to welcome Dan Toon, the new manager with Water and Wastewater, back to the team. So, welcome, Dan. I'm not sure whether you know a few faces around the table, but there's a few new ones there that we'd like to introduce you to. Councillor Donna Kirkland and Councillor Shane Latcham, and Councillor Grant Mathers, probably the new faces around the table that you wouldn't know. But welcome to the team, and we've got a lot of work in that space, so I'm sure you'll be able to help us out with some of those projects and taking us forward in that water and wastewater world. So thank you. Righto, moving on to apologies and leave of absence nil. Confirmation of the minutes from the previous meeting that was held on the 6th of December. Moved Councillor Smith, seconded Councillor Wickerson. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Item 5, declarations of interests and matters on the agenda, councillors. We have one item there. Councillor Smith has informed the meeting. Councillor Smith, did you want to comment to that one? That's the pipeline project?
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. 10.1, we're talking about the project delivery capital project report. Mount Morgan Water's supply pipeline project. I've got a conflict of interest because my nephew is a partner in MTC Industries, which has a contract with FRW to cut potable drinking water to Mount Morgan. And the pipeline, I've got a conflict with that as well, because my brother owns a property at 248 Cabra Road, and my sister and brother-in-law own a property on the corner of Mimira and Poison Creek Roads, which is where the pipeline is going past. I'll deal with the conflict by leaving the room and staying away from the place where the meeting is being held when this matter is being discussed and voted on. Okay,
thanks, Councillor Smith. So we'll deal with those items in that report first, and then when we get to the pipeline and water one, we can deal with that separately. That's the case. Okay. Welcome, Councillor Mathers. Business outstanding nil, public forums deputation nil, presentations of petitions nil, and the council delegate reports nil. So move straight into the officers' reports, councillors. Officers' reports 10.1, the delivery project of the capital project report for January 2023. And I'll ask Peter to walk us through that, or Andrew?
Andrew's going to present, and I think probably the easiest is that he just presents all of the reports, and we won't present the Mount Morgan pipeline. We'll just take it as read, read the notes if there's any.
To save any issues there. Okay. Unless there's something burning that we need to deal with, then we can deal with it at that time with the conflict with Councillor Smith. So I'll hand over to you. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, Councillors. Good morning. I'd like to present the January capital project status report. So the first project on that is the Alliance Maintenance Facility. So this is the new hangar at the airport. So that work is now nearing completion. There is still some minor landscaping works to be completed around the car park area, and they still haven't got power connection there, but they have told me that they have engaged Stanky Electrics to do the high voltage connection, and they'll start work on the civil works next week, and anticipate that that'll all be done by mid-March. And then I understand that they're looking at an opening probably around about May for that facility. They want to get it a bit established, so it's been completed. So Arthur Street Pump Station. So this project, we have been out to tender. Tenders have come in and they're in excess of our budget, so we have put that project on hold, and we're looking at where that fits in with the whole strategy of Gracemere and South Rockhampton. Botanic Gardens and Zoo redevelopment. So package 2, which is the Visitor Hub and Operations Centre. So we did go out to tender for that and got very high tender result. So we've brought that back and split it into some stages. The car park, we've gone out for the car park and be able to look at the car park. We'll award a tender this week. It's coming under the budget, so we'll award that. The Visitor Hub, which is we're calling Stage 1 now, we're just getting that redesigned, and we'll go back out to tender hopefully end of this month, early March, and hoping to get a result that's within our budget.
Got a question there on that one, Andrew. Councillor Rutherford.
Mr Mayor, I'm happy to wait until they've all gone through, or if Andrew wants to address them while we're...
It might be best to deal with them on the issue, so you've got capture that at the time, Councillor Rutherford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. And Andrew, it is just on the Visitor Hub at the zoo. we knew in November that those tender prices were too high. I'm just wondering, is there any way we can bring it forward? Because that job was done in 2 sections. So we sort of knew that it, as a whole, may be too much, and the visitor hub package should be out ready to go. So is there a reason why we have to wait till the 3rd of March before we release them again?
Well, just a bit of complexity in pulling the 2 designs apart. So yes, they were, I suppose, the intent was that they went out as sort of designed as 2 packages, but there is there's IT, there's sewage, stormwater, infrastructure that interlinks. So which we've got to put in for stage 2, which will be part of stage 1. So it's just working through those complexities. So it's all getting all the consultants, the hydraulic, mechanical, electrical. So we've got Jacob working on it with us to just to collate all that into a logical package that we can go back out. So it's just taking a little bit of time, obviously the Christmas break.
Yeah.
But no, the intent is to, as quick as possible, to get that package together and get it out.
Oh.
So we did break out the car park and put that out straight away. That was, wasn't very complex. So.
Alrighty, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Smith?
Yeah, can I just go back to the Arthur Street pump station? I'm sort of a little bit concerned about that. I'm wondering where that leaves Gracemere, because I know it's at capacity, its sewage treatment plant, and there has been some issues there with smell, etc.
Peter?
Yeah, through you, the pump station isn't really having a direct impact on the Gracemere strategy. It's about sequencing of various works, and we've got so many actions that we are doing in that strategy. They're still all going forward. It was just we've paused the Arthur Street, but we are still actively doing improvement works to the minimum on Gracemere to bring it up to better performance. So we're still working through that. You do know I said earlier we would come back to council and give you an update on that capital program. We're just waiting for all of the tenders to close, and then we'll come back and look at that strategy. But we are still committed to improving Gracemere and also diverting Gracemere.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Smith. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. So package 3, which is a playground. So I'm pleased to advise that the Dingo play structures arrived in town today. So they'll work through, get that component installed along with the soft fall. So hopefully by the end of this month, that'll all be completed. And I understand they're looking at an opening to coincide with World Park Week and sometime in March, 11th of March. So.
I was up there talking with some of the contractors, and yeah, they were really impressed with the Dingo, and saying that it's kids are just their eyes are going to be like saucers when they come in through the entrance there. It's that impressive. So looking forward to that.
Yep, package 4. So package 4 is a new eagle enclosure. So we've awarded that contract to Hutchinson's. It's a D&C, so they've established themselves on site and started work on that. The design's about 75% complete. So they will now, I suppose, put that design into manufacture of the structural steel, fabrication of structural steel, and get that project underway. Glenmore Water Treatment Plant upgrade. So work's continuing on that project. Filter number 9, so that's been taken offline, and they've commenced rebuilding that filter. So they've removed the existing concrete floor and under drains and preparing that for reconstruction now. Control room, so the electrical works are progressing. There's roughing of electrical and comms cabling into the control room, and they're starting to line and sheet that. The pack dosing system, so the SCADA integration is underway. It's expected to be completed by the end of this week. And the build for the new polymer dosing skid is underway. Glenmore Water Treatment Solar Farm. So we've awarded that contract to Gem Solar. So we've had a pre-start meeting with them. So they've commenced the procurement of long lead items. I think it's 2,600 odd solar panels that they're procuring. So they look like they'll have them and probably start late March, early April on site. So we'll just work with them and notify council when we get a bit closer to confirming that start date. Gracemere and South Rocky STP strategy. So there's a number of smaller projects associated with this. So the installation of the penstocks and the bioreactors. So at South Rocky, that's all been completed. New caustic dosing system. The design's been completed. We have seeked the costing on that, but we're not happy with the results we did get through the contractor. So we are looking at what we can do there. The recycled water pump station at South Rocky, so that's under construction at the moment. They're about to pour the chambers have been installed, so they're about to pour the lids for that project. And we have awarded a design contract to Becca Hunter to look at the other works associated on that side, so the digesters, the sludge pumping and all those sort of other works that are required. Sewer diversion from Gracemere to South Rocky, so we've also awarded that design for that new pump station there, and I think our internal teams have worked on the design for the pipeline. And we haven't, I suppose the next major thing to look at under that whole strategy is the new South Rockhampton sewage treatment plant. So we'll start in the next few months looking at some site options and things around all that. And in relation to Gracemere, so we have placed a variation order on Hasland for a new aeration system out at Gracemere. So that's again a long lead time item, but it should be here very shortly. Hail damage insurance claims. So most of that work's been completed with the exception of the roof over the office at the North Rocky treatment plant. So we're looking at a bit of maybe an extension to that building under this current redevelopment. So we'll work through that proposal with the current tenderer. Mount Morgan Pool. So tenders have closed with that. We've got 3 offers. 2 are within our budget. So we are working with the 2 lowest with some tender clarification. So hopefully end of this week we should be in a position to award. North Rockhampton Sewage Treatment Plant. So that project continues. Construction of the concrete structure, so the inlet works is basically complete in relation to concrete works. They started sandblasting or grit blasting the inside chambers and applying the epoxy coating. Should go in as of today. Further sections of the oxidation ditch and bioreactor, so there's just some the end walls, the curved end walls to be formed and reinforced, so they're working on those now. The footing and ring beams to Clarifier have been completed, and they'll start working on the sludge pocket and forming up for the slab in the next few weeks. So hopefully by the end of March, I think all the main concrete structure will be completed, and then we'll be able to submit for the balance of the works for Queensland funding. Footings have been excavated and steel tied for the HV, the high voltage buildings. That's a new structure to put new transformers on, and the blower building has been completed up to the deck. The HV transformers too have also been procured, so as soon as we get that structure finished, we'll have them delivered to site and hopefully work through getting the power connection. Mount Morgan Water Treatment Plant. So we've ordered a contract there to get that project up and running, to get that plant up and running. So they took possession of site on the 9th of January, so they've started work sandblasting and grit blasting some of the filters and the filter structure. So they'll work through, I suppose, refurbishing that. We have a consultant meeting with some FRW staff and our staff up there today just to do a further condition assessment on what else is required to bring that online. I think their target date's sort of mid-April to have that all completed. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Councillors, there's no questions there. I'll happy to move and seek a seconder with regards to that report. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Fisher. I'll put that. Those in favour. Those opposed. Motion's carried unanimously. We'll move on to 10.2. Thank you. The Food Organics, Garden Organics Food Trial, FOGO, the Food Trial Project Evaluation. George, would you like to present that report, please?
Good morning, Mr Mayor, councillors. This is a presentation in support of the submitted evaluation report for the FOGO trial. So I've got quite a few slides, but I'll rattle through them as quick as possible. So, but just to give you a flavour as to what the evaluation report has really thrown up, and how we propose to move forward. So, get this to work. And any questions? So, look, you're all familiar with what the trial looked like. 12 months, ended in 30th September last year. The evaluation process has basically been an integrated approach across a whole range of data we gathered, across daily tonnages, presentation information, 3 compositional audits, participant surveys, 3 of them, and ongoing bin inspections where we lifted the lid on about 11,000 bin lids actually over the course of the 12 months. So. Lots and lots of data to mash through. This is a sort of consolidation of that data. Just to point out that this trial was never intended to be a full cost evaluation of a full service delivery. They're not comparable, nor was it looking to evaluate the actual processing end of the supply chain. That was all contracted out to New Gracemere. So there's some headline stats. I won't dwell on that. I can come back to that if you want, but I'm going to go through those anyway. So the report is broken into sort of 4 primary sections, really. There's service effectiveness, service efficiency, some service delivery information, and then the actual sort of long-term impact and sustainability outcomes. So in terms of effectiveness, no surprises, but what we did find over the 12 months, there was a seasonal cycle. Important to note because this will obviously drive your resourcing requirements in terms of collections, but also at the processing end as well, what capacity you need at any particular point in the year, and also importantly what the mix is going to be, the compositional mix is going to be at the processing end, so what the carbon nitrogen mix is. And as you can see, the dark green is the GO, and the light green is the FOGO. They did pretty much the same thing which you would expect because it's driven by the climate, it's driven by the extra mowing going on in the summer months. Presentation rate did very similar. Really good data though because we didn't have any sort of indication as to what the presentation rate was going to be before we started this, so really good to now sort of have nailed that down over a 12-month cycle. We averaged about 61 across all 3 areas, peaking at 70 in the summer months and dropping down to about 50 in the winter months. So. There was an overall increase in tonnes at the curbside. So by giving them a 3rd bin, you actually increase the amount of waste that's presented at the curbside. So again, all driven, our assumption is that people aren't going out and buying more food to throw away. It's Garden Organics that's driving that. So, but we did ask them in the surveys. By the way, just as a note, anything, I won't be reading through these, but anything in inverted commas there is just quotes from participants during the surveying and customer service, etc. We did ask them in the survey where they felt this extra waste was coming from. It was a kind of pretty much a 50-50 split between we used to take it to the waste transfer station or we used to put it on our garden. So again, not rocket science, but good to know, good to see the quantum. As you can see, there was a strange difference which I haven't got a full explanation for.
Just with South Rocky, why, is there any reason around that?
No, not really. Look, there are different suburbs, as you know. It was very much sort of over the back of the range there, sort of Wentworth, Mary, that area there up to Agnes. So there's quite a lot of bigger gardens there, so perhaps they're just more used to putting it on the garden and they didn't really change their habits, whereas in Gracemere, as you know, it's kind of a much more sort of new estate build, less established gardens, so perhaps there was more incentive there rather than just having it piled in, you know, alongside the house. Great, let's put it in the bin. That's my sort of anecdotal guess, though, really, rather than anything quantitative. But yeah, interesting. So we can expect up to 30%, but we can also expect some areas where there won't necessarily be such a big increase. Now, recovery rates. So recovery is the amount, so you take the organic waste in both bins and how much of that organic waste did we recover. So that's what the recovery rate is. So we set targets on this. We had 50% target for food recovery and a 95% for garden organics. And in terms of the FOGO, we achieved both targets, which is fantastic. In the go-only area, we just missed the garden organics recovery rate. So again, the explanation there is most likely just because there was really no extra incentive to actually engage and actually participate in the Go Organics, because all we did was give them an extra bin. We didn't actually do anything to their existing configuration. There would have been a sizable percentage that just didn't participate. They just carried on using their general waste bin as they always had. So our assumption is that's where the loss, that's where the lower recovery rate on the garden organics occurred. The diversion rate, as opposed to the recovery rate, the diversion rate is how much of the total waste that's presented at the curbside are you actually diverting from landfill. Okay, so now these translated, this was quite a tricky calculation because there was obviously that increase in waste at the curbside, which you had to sort of factor out before you could actually say how much were we actually going to divert from landfill. So these fell out pretty positive as well. We hit 55% diversion. Well, there's two sets of data, as you can see here. You've got what comes out of the two audits that we did, the mid-trial and the end-trial audit. And then there's actually the second line there is what came out of the 12 months worth of Weybridge data. So they throw up slightly different results, but in the Go area you can see there was a consistent sort of 20% diversion rate, whereas in the FOGO area it's somewhere between 50 and 55%. So, but still very positive. That would translate into 10,000 tonnes per annum on a FOGO scheme and about 4,000 tonnes per annum on a Go-only scheme. So both positive diversion from landfill for sure. In terms of service efficiency, look, by far and away the biggest issue that we encountered was the reduction in the FOGO areas. We reduced the bin size, both service frequency down to a fortnight, and then the bin size was reduced down to a 140-litre bin. This caused the most sort of problems for us and for the participants for sure. You can see there in great, so what that graph is basically showing is you can see right in Q1, right from the off, we had a very big number of requests. So 18% in Gracemere of participants actually requested for an upsized bin pretty much immediately or within that first quarter. And we were happy to service that request. We didn't stand in anybody's way. I mean, we had a conversation with them, we gave them some education, we tried to look at what the root causes were and sort of gather some information on the back of it. But everybody who asked was given the upsized bin. And then you see that there was a continued increase over the course of but at a much slower rate over the course of the trial. Gracemere, you can see they had double the number of requests that Southside had. So, and you'll see that reflected in the weight tonnages that you'll see coming through in a bit. This is another way of looking at it. So this is about the bin fullness on the curbside. So that first block is what it looked like pre-trial, so before we put anything in place. And you can see there's a fairly even spread so the far left is not very full at all, less than 25% full. The fourth block is 100% full, 75 to 100% full. So you can see about 35% are sort of are approaching 100% full before we started. And then you can see the big spike, particularly in Gracemere, but also in Southside. Suddenly you're up to 60% of bins are actually being presented 100% full. So clearly it caused an issue, and clearly it didn't cause any issue at all in Northside, because again, we just offered them an extra bin. Where that's, so that's a given truth. I missed a slide there, no. What was also interesting was because we did the bin inspections, we were able to actually sort of do a correlation between to what extent was that full general waste bin actually driving contamination in the FOGO bin, and it most definitely was. You can see there, so on the far right of that graph, They're the 100% full general waste bins, and you can see just how much, what percentage of the bins were actually showing up as contaminated. So clearly what's happening there is there's a restriction on the general waste bin. Once they get to capacity, that waste, that bagged waste or that mixed waste is just going straight into the FOGO bin. So, and we saw that on the pavement, which is why we ran this analysis, because it's like, yeah, that's clearly the outcome that you get there. Moving to contamination, again, a lot of data there, but again, sort of a couple of important threads to pull out. Again, you can see Gracemere is clearly performing worse, so just don't worry about that far right at the moment, just concentrate on that. That's the tonnage data as we collected through the year, so this is what we were looking at as the weeks progressed. And you can see Gracemere clearly had the worst problem from the off. South side a much lesser problem, about half the problem, and north side really there was very little problem, to be honest. But then what also happened was we worked incredibly hard right at the outset, communicating with everybody on the ground, having face-to-face. We kind of run out of steam a little bit mid-trial, and you could see that the contamination started to exasperate. And then we did actually put in a pretty hardcore behaviour change sort of campaign from sort of quarter three rolling into quarter four. And you can see that it did start to have an impact. So overall, we ended up, as far as our tonnage data was concerned, Gracemere at about 5.7%, south side at 2.5%, and north side at 0.9%. And that was against a target of less than 3% was what we were targeting. Now, the compositional audits, when we throw it all on the ground and they pick through it, every last minutiae of detail, you can see showed exactly the same pattern, but a much higher percentage of contamination. So, and honestly, we don't have any explanation for that 14.3%. That is very high and quite upsetting, but you know, that's just the way it falls out, I guess. And there is a limitation to compositional audits in so much as they are just a snapshot. But I'm putting both of those up just as a sort of as a reference point. I think for me, probably the most important piece of information out of this whole thing, if you take nothing else away from all these graphs, this is probably the most important for me. This is the number of contaminated bins. So it's all very well talking about percentage contamination in the whole load, and that is important, especially for the processor. But in terms of us addressing that contamination, who's doing the contamination? Well, what you're seeing here with that light green block at the start, they're all perfect. Those bins, when we lift the lid, there's no contamination. They are doing it right, okay? So there's 82, 90% in Gracemere and Southside who are doing it perfect, yeah? Then your next two blocks are sort of minor contamination. You know, there's a few things in there. Maybe there's a bread bag, you know, it's still in the bag, you know, thrown on top, crisp packet, or maybe there's something in there that they've misinterpreted. Do you know what I mean? They're throwing a pair of sneakers in there because they think it's, you know, organic or, you know, but basically it's still general, it's still FOGO, it's still legitimate, and but they're just making a few minor mistakes. You can fix that with some good education. And then the last two columns are serious or catastrophic. So that's the general waste. They're just using it as a general waste bin, or they've just thrown in bags and bags of bagged waste, and we've no idea what's in it, so all has to go as contamination. And so you can see that it's, even in the worst areas in Gracemere, it was only 8% of the people that were genuinely sort of the major problem. And in Southside, it was as low as 3%. So that really drives how we approach the sort of education and the behaviour change for this piece, I think, even though some of those contamination figures looked a bit alarming and were certainly above target. I think what this says is basically it's a minority that we need to address and get in front of. I made reference to the behaviour change campaign. We did a really nice piece where we sort of really focused on about 4 or 5 specific themes that we wanted to drill out. I won't go into the detail here, but a couple of the highlights. We did ask for, you know, we did a deep dive on what actually food out of that 50 to 53% that we were recovering, what were they recovering and what weren't they recovering. It became quite obvious here that, you know, vegetable peelings, cooked vegetables, tea bags, coffee grounds, it's very easy stuff at the kitchen sink. Do you know what I mean? They had no issue with that. I think it's quite intuitive and quite natural. Bones, fish, seafood, quite high. Cooked meat, quite high. That was quite encouraging as well, because that could potentially been a bit of a sticking point. But what you can also see is that the liquidy, sort of messy stuff, that's not being recovered particularly well. So your yogurt and milk, your gravy. Surprisingly, pet food was quite low on the thing as well. So again, maybe just because it's a very smelly product that you don't want sort of next to the kitchen sink. But so that was interesting. We then went on and asked what the barriers were. Okay, so you're not recovering, you're recovering some stuff very well, but you're not recovering other. Why? It became very clear, those bottom 3 blocks there, they are basically maggots and flies, the smell and the odour, both at the bin and at the kitchen caddy, and it's just too difficult to, I haven't got time, too difficult to separate the food packaging from the food itself. So again, really informative information that we can take forward when we sort of construct the education campaigns and really get in front of people and get them doing getting the desired behaviours. Caddy liners was also, as you know, the trial set up Gracemere and Southside exactly the same, except that Gracemere were given caddy liners and Southside weren't. Some really good data here. You'll see that Gracemere actually generated more food waste, so they were throwing away a lot more food. So this is based on the end of trial audit data. So just in that 1 week, they threw away half a tonne of food waste in total, at 499. But they recovered a lot more of it. They recovered 56% of their general waste, of their food organics, beg your pardon, whereas Southside's only came in at 49%. So, and that was again consistently seen across the 2 audits. So that was really interesting. We can't necessarily say that it was entirely to do with the caddy bags. There may have been other factors involved, but there's a sense that the caddy bags certainly had a positive impact on the amount of food recovery, because it was quite difficult. And there was a number of issues around the caddy liners. These are sort of a random set of pictures, but the top ones, I just love that top left. That was a retired dude on Brecknell Street that used to just wrap it beautifully. It was like Christmas presents every time he looked in the bin. And a number of people actually adopted that. Was one of our recommendations. If you didn't want to use caddy bags in the south side, then wrap it in paper or something. The bottom picture is just referencing the fact that if you go to the supermarket right now and try and buy legitimate compostable caddy bags, it is incredibly difficult. But there's a couple of different bags there. One is compostable and perfectly legitimate. The other is 50% plant-based, which means the other 50% is plastic, so it's not legitimate, and you can barely tell them apart, and they're right next to each other, and it's just a nightmare, really. So that's certainly an issue that we've got to address with the help of the state. Just in terms of service delivery, there was quite a number of findings. The service delivery went really well. Sort of big up to the collections team for the work that they did there, because we did all this in-house. But probably the main learning that I just wanted to flag today was we did actually go and ask the participants how they preferred. We had the opportunity in this trial to use a lot of different channels, try out a lot of different channels. So we were doing face-to-face, we were doing call flute signs around the neighbourhoods, letterbox drops, etc. Interestingly, when we asked them how would they prefer to be communicated with on this stuff, you'll see that flyers and newsletters, emails, rates notice, council website, social media, text messages all came out relatively strong. TV, radio, newspapers, customer call centre, word of mouth, others not. So, and what that really told us was that, this is one of the recommendations in this evaluation report, is that most of those are going to work from a digital perspective. They're great digital channels, but we just simply don't have that access at the moment. What we have in our rating database is simply names and addresses for the ratepayer. What we don't have is a decent contact database that we can access through these channels, except for the rates notice perhaps, but to the resident, direct to the resident. So that's something that we're working with the media and comms team now to really sort of try and build in anticipation of a full service rollout. Couple of quick slides on impact, sort of long-term impact then. So were the participants supportive? Absolutely. Couple of interesting nuances that fell out of this. Gracemere started more enthusiastic than it ended. Perhaps again because of some of that stats that I've shown you, the sort of the 30% that asked for a bigger upsized bin, the higher level of waste generation, therefore the higher pressure on the general weight, the reduced general waste capacity, and the high contamination all sort of pointed to that. Southside, on the other hand, actually started at sort of high 60s% approval and ended up at 89% approval. So they actually really bought into it during the trial. So that was quite interesting. And again, Northside, very little sort of change really, again, because their service configuration was pretty much the same with an extra bin. So, but lots of positive feedback. in terms of supportiveness for the program, so no doubt there. Willingness to pay, however, I mean, and this is an age-old issue, you know what I mean? Do you want to pay for something? No. And you can see there that very few were strongly supportive, and then it was a fairly even spread across, you know, from supportive to very supportive, strongly opposed. But you know, yeah, can't say much about that. So in terms of recommendations, again, nothing earth-shattering, but it has been an excellent opportunity to sort of really focus, you know, what we need to focus on in terms of building a sort of a whole of community rollout. The first one there, because of that sort of, you know, like I say, there was a vast majority that really bought into what we offered, the service we offered, and then there was a sizable minority that struggled with certain components of it. And so I think what that really led to was a conclusion that we do need to offer a portfolio of services. And that's pretty standard when you look in New South Wales, Victoria, and people have been doing this now for 10, 15 years. It's quite common to see a sort of a menu of bin options, all with tiered pricing to suit different needs. I've spoken to it already, but we need an immediate investment in the behaviour change plan to sort of build the engagement. And anticipation is that by the time we deliver the bins at the curbside, assuming that we are going to go ahead with this, everybody needs to know exactly what it is that's happening. Everybody needs to be expecting it. In fact, they need to be waiting for it. Do you know what I mean? That we can't start the behaviour change and the education, you know, a few weeks out. It's just, it will be a disaster. The regulatory mechanisms are required. Look, that's speaking to the idea around that 8% that are doing most of the contamination. Again, with good education and good communication with these people, we can certainly bring that down, but there is always going to be a residual element out there who just simply are hostile to the whole idea, just not interested, and we need some kind of regulatory mechanism, be that something from the state level or be that something at local law level where we can actually sort of, you know, temporarily withdraw service or the like, so, which at the moment is a little bit tricky. We need a very simple to understand eligible list of materials. That again is something that the state are working on towards, looking for a much tighter definition. We went a bit too broad. We had a lot of options of what could go in there, tissue paper, etc., etc. And I think the lessons learned from the yellow lid bin is keep it simple. So we will be looking to go aligned with what the state are looking at the moment, which is food organics, garden organics, and allowable caddy liners. And that's basically it. There's no packaging. There's no, even if it is potentially compostable because it's paper or cardboard or whatever, we don't want it in there. We don't want to confuse the message. So. FOGO hazards should be issued with caddy liners. So from the evidence, we're comfortable that actually we were really not sure when we set out. In fact, personally, I was kind of hoping that it would prove that caddy liners had no impact and we could save that cash outlay. But I think it would be prudent to actually roll out with caddy liners in the first instance, and then perhaps, you know, make it sort of something that once you get everybody on board, that it becomes sort of something that you sort of slowly withdraw over time, if that works. An immediate investment required in building that community electronic database. We're already working with the comms and media team on that point, but that really needs to be a focus of attention, I think, for our team going forward. Multi-dwelling, I didn't touch on it in the presentation, but we did have a few MUDs in multi-dwelling units in our trial, and we found that their behaviours are very different. They have different waste composition and quantities, and there's a different sort of whole different alignment because, you know, they don't necessarily have control of the garden, or they're just not generating enough, they don't have yard space, etc., etc. So we would be excluding that from any initial rollout and dealing with them as a separate entity in the same way as we might deal with the sort of the cafes and restaurants and stuff in the CBD, etc. And then a set of standard performance and data capture methods. So again, that's really quite a technical thing, but there was a bit of we've seen data from the other trial areas, from Townsville in particular, and we're very comparable. We've come up very similar to a lot of the Townsville metrics, but there was quite a lot of disparity between how we measured certain things and how we went about capturing some of the data. So again, that's something that we're working on with the state to look for some standard metrics and measures to make it easier for us, but to make it easier for you guys as well, you know, and everybody, all the stakeholders in this to really understand what the performance looks like. So yeah, so just on a final note, just look, and I'm coming back to this again because it's, you know, I think it's really important. One of the key learnings out of this really, we saw it on the ground. The key to behaviour change is the social norming. You could see it, certain streets would sort of go rogue on us, you know, and certain streets would behave beautifully on us, you know, and it is because you look at what your neighbours are doing and you're looking at that for that group behaviour. This trial also demonstrated, you look through that data, you see that the vast majority are on board with it, you know, and it's a minority that are actually, you know, that still need we still need to work with. So it's important not to overstate those issues, work with them to remove those barriers, to create incentives, which is what a lot of these recommendations are about. And like I just said, the successful organic curbside service will need that critical mass of community support well in advance of actually delivering the bin to the curbside, where organic recovery becomes a social norm for us. So, yeah, thank you. Any questions?
Okay, thanks, George. I've got a couple of lights on there. I'll go to Councillor Kirkland, then Councillor Latcham. Councillor Kirkland, thank you.
I'm happy for Councillor Latcham to go first.
You've been waiting.
No. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, George. This is a really comprehensive report, and I've no doubt you had your face in a computer for many, many, many hours to present this to us. And it did take quite a bit of digesting. And I see that probably I have a lot of questions, but rather than going through all of those, I'll just come back to your summary at the end and your recommendations. And I'd probably, my one question here around that is, if we were to go to a suite of options, so people were to buy into this, they pay extra for the service, etc., they're in effect going to be a part of removing the load that's going through to landfill, therefore saving the entire region the expense of that. And looking back at your numbers there, you estimated a projected figure of, it was just over 10,000 tonne or something, and I think that equates to just shy of $1 million in my calculations at $90 a tonne. So how does that go? I mean, how is that fair and equitable if the people who are doing the right thing are paying to do the right thing, but everybody who's doing the wrong thing benefits from it?
That's a good question, and it's one that we're all going to struggle with, because if they don't take it, then we're all going to be paying even higher.
Can I just jump in there, because I think if I'm reading what portfolio is, and I'm going to use my own experience in FOGO, is the portfolio is that you pay more to not recycle. So if you get a bigger red bin and you're not going to be sustainable in your actions, you'll pay a higher waste charge than the person who's got a 80 litre bin. So if I want to keep my 240, we're going to pay a higher charge, and me, I've got my 80, I pay way less because I am recycling and saving the planet.
Okay.
That's the kind of portfolio I think you're
Yes.
describing?
Yeah.
So to be clear, if I'm wanting to opt into this and I want the FOGO, I'm going to pay less than what I'm currently paying.
I'm not sure there's going to be an opt-in, opt-out thing. That's a different question.
Right.
I don't know whether
Well, I
that's...
think they probably would seek some more clarity on that to make sure that it's...
The key thing is bin size.
Yeah.
And if someone wants to have 240s, good, but you're going to pay a lot because you're filling up our landfill versus the person who's on the 80 recycling and diverting.
Awesome.
I think through the chair as well, Councillor, they're very good questions, and these are questions that we ask ourselves as well, and we don't have the answers to that yet. We are doing other pieces of work at the moment with PwC and a number of other councils looking at that suite of bin options and what are the options that a local government should offer, and what are the different pricing strategies that a local government can adopt to drive the best outcome for that community. So we're still working in some of these spaces, and I think prior to all of that information, all of those types of questions will be answered when we come back with a full business case.
Okay, so it's really not fleshed out at this stage.
This is, as George said, probably on the first or second slide, this was not about looking at the cost of the service and some of those other things. This was just more around the, you know, the diversion and recovery and participation and sentiment and those kinds of things.
Thanks, Michael. Through you, Mr. Chair. I value that feedback. Thank you. At the same time, we need to be looking at the fiscal side of this to make the decision as to whether we're going to go with this. I understand that.
Yeah, we'll be
But the two
given,
need to
you'll be given all of that information in due course.
Before,
Councillor.
good, very good. I do have two burning questions. One is in the report you mentioned that there was some contamination from asbestos that hadn't been built in, and it blew the cost of the actual trial out a little, etc. Is there no, what happens if someone puts asbestos normally into the red bin? Does it just go to landfill, or are you able to detect that before that happens?
No, it goes to landfill. If if the driver identifies if the lid's open or partially open and there's a whole chunk of asbestos, poking out of the bin, we won't service it. We'll contact local laws and our EHOs, and they'll go out there and inspect it and identify it and have a friendly conversation or otherwise with the resident, and then we'll go from there. Ultimately, we would then go and service that bin separately, or potentially even engage a licensed asbestos removalist company to, or put that responsibility back onto the resident. There will be asbestos in a percentage of curbside waste bins and recycling bins. We did a recent audit, our recent annual audit, and on the very last day, the auditors found asbestos in a recycling bin. So it does happen.
Is there a fine or anything that goes back to people that use the normal bins for asbestos?
No.
No.
The vast majority of times it's just flipped in with the load and it goes into a truck with 600 other bins and it gets dumped at the landfill and we don't even know about it.
And my final question, thank you, Mr. Mayor, is the burning question as well about contamination. And I'm told a lie, there's two questions, but I won't ask the other one. Is about contamination and what constitutes contamination in the organics bin. I remember Councillor Fisher did a very good TV presentation, and I was freaking out just quietly because I thought, you know what, I struggle, this is a transparent moment here for everybody, to tell the difference between a lot of the weeds and a lot of the plants. And so he was saying, this shouldn't go in the bin, that this should go in the bin, this shouldn't go in the bin, this should go in the bin. They're all plants as far as I was concerned. So how did you determine contamination in that garden organics bin, and how strict was it?
Yeah, and I think that speaks to some of the difference that we saw between our sort of tonnage data, where the contamination was actually fed back to us by the processor. So they were taking out what they needed to take out in order to make it suitable to windrow. So they were taking out the obvious, the plastics and the non-organics. Yeah, whereas when we got to compositional audit, they were much stricter, and the definition that we set up at the beginning of the trial was set to us by DES, because as you know, DES funded this trial, they sort of established sort of some standards as to how we would define contamination. So basically, and it refers back to a New South Wales guideline, which basically says however you define what the allowable is, then everything else is contamination. Yeah, so, and that's why one of the recommendations is to set up some better definitions and standards around all of this, because that actually turned out to be quite flimsy and quite loose. So, for example, if you had mangoes falling off your tree and you threw them into your garden organics bin in the north side, that was actually contamination, even though perfectly acceptable going into an organics mix, but it's food. You see what I mean? So it was a little bit flimsy, and that's why there was a difference. But in terms of the education, that's why we focused this idea on keeping it as simple as possible, because we don't want people getting confused and sort of worrying too much. So if it's organics, it goes in. If it's food, if you can eat it, put it in your mouth and eat it, it goes in. Anything else, it's not going in. Do you know what I mean? Be it packaging, or even if you think it might be organic, don't put it in. So at the moment, the trial was, like I said, there were some issues with the data in the trial in that respect, which we've tried to flag, do you know what I mean, and why there is sort of disparity between some of the data sets. And that's some of the recommendations is addressing that, is saying we need a much clearer standard as to what is allowable and what isn't. You need to keep that as simple as possible.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Kirkland. George, for that answer. I'll just ask Peter just to walk through the bins and the timing of those collections, or George?
Well, those three bins, so that's 2240s
But it is but it is an increase from where we were, yeah. Because the levy's coming off and, this is going to have a huge impact to our community and one that we're going to need to explain in detail as that process walks through and what the benefits can be with these huge increases in diversion of waste from landfills.
Oh, don't misread me.
No.
I'm for
not-
this.
I'm
I
not
think it's a fabulous thing, and I can see the benefits for our community. You know, we're talking $1 million savings just at a projection, and if everybody gets on board, and that's based on these types of statistics, these types of percentages, once the education starts, you know, I can see that there's huge benefits to us moving forward. I'm just scrutinising.
No. I'm suggesting that there's a huge financial impact to our ratepayers going forward just to do this, and this is bigger than the amalgamation, bigger than losing the fags. It's huge, and we're going to need to bring the community along with us as this process goes through, because we're one of the big 7 councils that are going to lose that levy money coming back to them, where neighbours around us won't have that impact, and it's not it's not going to be an easy path, so we're going to need to all understand what that process is as we go forward. Thanks, Councillor Kirkland. Councillor Latcham?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I totally agree with what you're saying. At the end of the day, this program is about diverting from landfill, and FOGO was one of the key strategies that should have been an easy win, with 53% potentially being able to be diverted away from landfill. And this, just some observations from your details, George, is from the report is, and it's been a good learning experience, because initially, as I understand, it was only going to be a 6-month trial, and we expanded out to a 12-month. And as you saw in the data, that there are changes seasonally. So that was something that was a benefit out of running it for the 12 months, which was a great thing. I like the fact we've obviously identified education, and that's going to be a challenge, because as Councillor Kirkland says, we're not sure what goes into what bins and stuff. So it's trying to get everyone on board with precisely what goes in the board is going to be a challenge. The other challenge is, and I see a lot of synergy with water, believe it or not. I see with water, the challenge, if you give a suite of options and they want the bigger bins, it's like those who want to water and keep watering, they don't care what it costs. If you can afford it, you don't care what it costs. That's not change. That's not bringing about behaviour change. So where you want someone to be water-wise, as a comparison, if they can afford it, they don't care. And you saw that percentage of people who just don't care. I don't know what the answer is other than regulatory, and the state's got to come on board with that and come in harsh, because if it's only something they can afford, well, they don't care. They'll just pay it, and it doesn't bring about behavioural change. So that's going to be the biggest challenge of all I see, is how to get people to do the right thing. And it's not about just the environment. I kind of compare it to cars. Those who can afford the big petrol guzzling cars, that's their choice. They can afford it. That's fine. Those who want the Teslas, because they want to be environmentally friendly and everything else, that's fine. Right? But there's not a big proportion of those people in our society at this stage. I know it's growing, but it's because of education and wanting to do the right thing sustainably and all those things. It's, in time, society's changing, but it's going to take a big challenge to get people to change their habits. And ultimately, it's about, I'll come back full circle, it's about diverting from landfill. And while we all see this as a great thing forward, it's a matter of getting the community on board and recognising why we need to do it. And yes, we understand the levy's coming off, and ultimately it's going to be the hip pocket that's going to determine it, and especially the poor people who can't, not as in poor, but the unfortunate people who can't afford it, they're going to have to do it tough, and they're probably the ones really that need more education to say, look, let's get it on board and let's change behaviours. Because I do know there are people out there who really don't care, and currently, and this was our FOGO, currently they're throwing nappies and stuff into yellow bins. They just don't care. So that's going to be the challenge, the don't care factor. But great report, and it's food for thought.
Thanks very much, Councillor Latcham, the portfolio spokesperson for waste. It is a difficult one, and change is hard to convey, and especially when it's going to be such a huge change. It's one we're going to need to all be across as that change occurs. I'm not sure where the lights went. I think Councillor Smith, and then I'll come across this side of the table. Thanks, Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, George. Lots of information there to digest. Just a couple of things. You mentioned that if we did go ahead with it, there would be penalties for people who didn't comply. What sort of penalties would you be looking at?
Well, as I say, we haven't got to that sort of level of detail at the moment. As Michael mentioned, there's the PwC are on board with about 6 councils. All the regional councils are basically working together to look at what a pricing mechanism, an incentive mechanism, behaviour change sort of mechanisms might look like in terms of that piece. And then it may well result in a recommendation that the state get involved at some level. Or it might be something that falls back on individual councils too, but we just don't know at the moment. We're sort of right in the knee-deep in that particular project right now. In fact, we've got a meeting tomorrow afternoon on that one. So,
Yeah, thanks for that. Just the other comment or question as well. Do you think, pardon me, sorry, do you think there's any correlation between the fact that Gracemere is a lot of rentals? South Rocky, the area you mentioned, would probably be all homeowners. You sometimes take more attention to, what they're doing in their yard and recycling, etc. Do you think there's any thing to be gained, to learn from the fact that rental compared to home ownership would have anything to do with their behaviour?
yeah, I mean, definitely, we don't have any sort of definitive data on that, suburb by suburb, unfortunately. But yes, I would be inclined to agree with you. We definitely saw Gracemere, for instance. You're right. There was a lot of rentals, not just rentals as well. There was kind of like some of the streets we chose. Actually, there were some sort of home businesses where they were not really businesses, but they were halfway houses and hostels for sort of disaffected youth and the like. Do you know what I mean? They got in touch. There was 3 of them actually, interestingly, and they got in touch because they were like, we're really struggling. These kids are coming in, they're going out, they're coming in, they're going out. We can't be educating them all about how to use the bins, all the time. So we had to put in some extra services, some extra sort of nuanced service provision for when we came up against instances like that. So it was interesting. Yeah, it was a very different dynamic in Gracemere as there was to the south side. Like you say, much more established home ownership on that south side suburbs. Interestingly as well, just going back to a similar point, something the council actually touched on, we also found some of the older generation actually were really sort of stuck in their habits and really struggled to understand what on earth it was that we were doing. That required a face-to-face intervention. That required us to actually go and sort of say hello, spend half an hour, have a chat around the bins. They got it. They were some of the best presented bins thereafter, but in the initial communication, it just went whoosh, like, well, what are you doing? I've had this bin for 70 years, so there's definitely different interventions for different dynamics. And just to go back to your point about Gracemere, we saw some similar data come out of Ipswich. Ipswich weren't one of the 3 funded councils by DES, but they also concurrently ran a trial with the rest of us. And they had some really poor contamination coming out of some of their suburbs that had a similar sort of socio-demographic to what we had in Gracemere. So it's interesting. I think that's where we're going to have to sort of identify as we sort of roll something out and make sure that we do have the correct intervention for the correct suburbs, as it were.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Councillor Smith. I'll go to Councillor Rutherford, Mathers and Deputy Mayor, Councillor Fisher.
Just, Mr Mayor, on one thing on this regulatory piece we're doing at the moment, that's not just purely focused on FOGO either.
No.
Okay, that's also focusing on the recycling bin, because it's a very similar pattern to what we're seeing, which is not surprising across in those FOGO areas between the FOGO bin and the recycling bin.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Councillor Rutherford.
Thanks. George, really great report, very interesting presentation, so thank you for that. I probably want to pick up on what Peter, the example Peter's given us with the smaller red bin, and I'm just wondering, Peter, from your experience, because George's presentation clearly showed that a smaller general waste bin drove up the contamination. Now, I would assume majority of people will choose the smaller bin because it's a cheaper option. But in doing that, this clearly shows, the data clearly showed that significantly impacted contamination. your experience or thoughts on?
Just
that?
very strong education, and the people that go to the small bin are generally very committed to it. So, no, the contamination rates and that service there are very low, less than 1%.
We're running, so just to clarify, yes, it does drive contamination, but it also drives diversion. It doubles diversion. So, just as an addendum, if you like, as you know, post-trial, we allowed participants to opt in or opt out, and we're still servicing about 70% of the trial participants. But because we've got those people that were sort of the problematic people out, the contamination has now dropped right down in all suburbs. So, those sort of 60-odd% that are still engaged in Gracemere doing a fantastic job. So again, goes back to my point about it's a minority that are causing that cross-contamination across the bins.
And do they have the smaller general waste bin, or are they the ones that had requested?
I can't tell you the exact numbers, but there's about, I would say it's about 40% have got the larger size bins and about 60% have still got the small bins.
All right. And then just a side issue, Mr Mayor, and I'm not sure whether you have already contacted the participants of the trial or not, but whether it would be a nice thing to obviously thank them. I assume that's been done, but let them know that some of the outcomes of the trial that they took part in, so that there's some, they have some actual feedback for the time and effort that they've gone to be part of it, because it's been extremely beneficial to us. And I'm sure if they could get a fairly summarised version of the outcome, I think they would find that really interesting and be appreciative of that.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's great, thank you. Yeah, and we'll work with the comms and media team to sort of put something out to them. Yeah, sure.
It's probably just a question for myself, George. Was there a complaint to a specific bin with the flies and the odour, or is it general just in the change that we were finding that? Did we go into that detail at all?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. We were predominantly asking why they weren't diverting, why they weren't putting into the FOGO bin or the organics bin. So it was definitely that was the focus of attention. And our comeback in most instances in terms of that conversation was, look, it's the same waste as you always had. The weather hasn't changed. The waste that you're generating hasn't changed. It's just the bin configuration has changed. So we just need to manage this better. We've given you that FOGO bin on a weekly service so that it doesn't create an odour and a maggot problem.
So there was an food organics going into the red lid bin?
Well, there was, yes, but yeah.
That fortnightly collection could increase to a fly.
Well, and I guess, I do flag it in the report, where, again, going back to this sort of minority, where you find the badly presented bins and the people who are just not managing it properly, you find it across all three bins. And so Michael's point about this is going to impact any regulatory sort of position we take is going to be across the yellow bin as well, because what you find is that, you lift the lid on all three bins and they're just, like, wow, okay, there's just a mess going on. Of course, the blame was coming on the organic. Oh, you've given us this organic service and you've reduced the general waste, and look at the maggots. And it's like, well, no, if you put in the right waste in the right bin, it's the same as it always was. It's a weekly service.
So, sorry, you found that with the 8%, where the others, there wasn't that complaint, or there was still a...
Look, you can't marry the data up perfectly, so there was complaint about this, and it came through clear in the surveying, so that, when we asked what are the major issues, maggots, and then when we would go and house visit, you'd be like, maggots and odour, so it was a conversation that we had to have with people. And most people got on board, do you know what I mean? Like I say, and realised what it was we were saying, that you just had to start. The problem being is that it's that last bit, you saw in that data there, that quite often they'll say it's just too difficult to separate the food from the packaging, so that's going in the general waste bin. So not only is that then filling up your capacity, but then that's causing your odour and maggot problem because it's sitting there for 2 weeks, Now, obviously, things like nappies, that's something that you can do nothing about, so we had to address that to an extent. So.
Yeah. Thanks, George. Councillor Mathers and Deputy Mayor.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. Just a comment and a couple of questions, if that's okay. Just wanted to start by, Michael and George, just you guys need to, and your team need to be congratulated on those program, how it's gone all the way through, with the communication with the with the community and the way that the results of it are sort of looking very positive. But I think that's also a lesson for us. I think that if this moves forward, it's going to be all about communication. It's going to be all about education is the only way that the program is going to work. So I'm glad that you're sort of looking at that. One of the questions I've got was kind of in line with what Councillor Rutherford was saying, you know, with the smaller bin. The costs that are involved, because obviously people, you know, it's easy enough to say, look, it's going to cost you a little bit more because you've got to pay, you know, to purchase an extra bin. But are we still looking at lifting that smaller red bin on a weekly basis, or would we, if it was a permanent scheme, would we be looking at trying to do that every 2 weeks?
Again, look, not wanting to preempt the business case, but the presumption at the moment is that to make the costings work, make this viable, that general waste service has to be a fortnightly service.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you really just negate most of the savings you get from.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because the way I was looking at it is otherwise we'd have to look at the increase. The increase for the extra bin would have to be substantial to pay for an extra week's service, because you've got 3 bins that are being, you know, picked up. Well, you know, one extra bin that's being picked up once a week and the other one fortnightly. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to come back on at the case study. But it's certainly, you know, I hope the figures are going to stack up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mathers. Councillor Fisher?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I think this has been a really productive trial, and actually they're credit to the state government. The trial there and the professionalism from Rockhampton, from Townsville and Ipswich has probably given the best data that they've ever received. Rather than just taking everything from the southeast corner, I think the information that has come is really good. But I know a number of the councillors have raised that behavioural change and the education, and I think before we actually go into the dollars and cents, we've actually got to work and lobby to actually get part of that levy money that the state is sitting on to actually come up with an education program that will actually work through regional Queensland, if not all of Queensland. And I think we've got to get that message, because otherwise you will get that contamination creep. You will get that negativity as to losing my 240 litre bin. But I think if we could actually have a really targeted campaign leading up to going into FOGO, I think we could actually have this as a success. If it's not funded for education, we actually may lose a very good chance of having something very productive in our communities. The other side of it is, we're doing all of this work. There may come a time in the next 5 to 10 years that our beyond renewables, our next opportunities, may actually all come back to one bin, taking all of our waste that we can actually generate power, alternate energy from our waste. So there's sort of, the horizon there is blurred at the moment. There's still not a clear direction. This is the best way forward at the moment, but I can still sort of think that there may be new technologies that will come and favour us, but at least Rockhampton is on the front foot at the head of the line. So Michael, George and all the team, this has been really good. Mr Mayor, your support of this program, right to talking to the state ministers, is so important, and I think with this we're going to be right at the forefront.
I think there's, and again, I'd like to thank the team for the work and commend the effort that's gone in the trial and providing that information back. I think the next steps are really going to be important for us going forward. I think you know, the large councils that are having the impact, there's advocacy in that group, and I think that's where we need to have this data to be able to convey that to the government to say that we've got to work with them, but not to the disadvantage of our ratepayers going forward as that change occurs. So, yeah, some big challenges, and yeah, I'm sure we've got the information and a great team there that's able to do that as we walk forward with this process. So, interesting times ahead, we'll see how that rolls. But I think that data will give us that information, how we can convey that to the public then about what needs to do, and it's important to get their support for the change as well as we go forward, because I'm sure that's a difficult thing in local government change, and introducing that is the hard part. But the trial, overall, the community support for it's been really well received as well, so which is good. We've got to get to that 8% though, and make sure that they know that there's an impact to the rest of the community if they're not doing the right thing as well. Okay, councillors, Councillor Latcham is the portfolio chair, happy to move recommendation. Deputy Mayor Councillor Fisher second. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Councillor, we might have a 10-minute recess and then move on to the last two items that are on the agenda, if that's okay. I'm happy to move that we have a 10-minute recess and come back at 20 past 10. And seconded Deputy Mayor Councillor Fisher. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Don't throw your arm out there, Councillor Smith, but the motion's carried. Thank you.
Taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
Taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, we might I'm happy to move that we resume the meeting and seek a seconder. Deputy Mayor Councillor Fisher, I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We move on to our next agenda item, 10.3, the Glenroy Road Project Status Report. Hand over to Martin to walk us through that project. Thanks very much, Martin.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Morning, councillors. I suppose the purpose of this report is really just to provide a bit of an update on where we're at with some of the projects on Glenroy Road, and probably seek a little bit of direction of our continued involvement in the Beef Roads campaign. So councillors are probably fully aware of the Roads of Strategic Importance program, which has been basically on council's agenda since about 2018. I think we started lobbying for that one, and we went through a period where we had in principle support from the federal government back in 2021, and then in the latest federal budget there was an allocation for the Glenroy Road project. So the project itself looks at sealing about 9.5 kilometres of road and also upgrading the Glenroy crossing over the Fitzroy River. In basic terms, it's a $25 million project, nominally split $20 million to the crossing and about $5 million to particular roadworks that were identified as part of the project. The funding split, as is the case with most federal government funding programs, is 80% federal government, 20% council. So that's $20 million from the federal government and $5 million from council. Now, the program itself, as being on the books for some time and having that in principle support, has been included in council's long-term financial forecast, and we have actually funds allocated to this particular project across the years of 22-23 through to 27-28. We've very recently received a funding agreement from the federal government, which I think we either just entered into or are about to enter into, but there are certainly a number of other bits of work that we need to do through the project development. We still have to write a project proposal report and submit to federal government to make sure that that funding comes free. So there's still a body of work. We're still developing that project. The second part is a different funding program coming out of the federal government called the Queensland Beef Corridors program, and councillors are probably aware the Queensland Beef Corridors group was formed around the time of Beef 2021, and our council joined with that group a little bit later in 2021. Now, this particular group is advocating obviously for upgrades to many and mainly unsealed roads in the central and western Queensland areas, focusing on beef and beef transport. In the most recent budget, federal budget, $400 million has been allocated by the federal government to the Queensland Beef Corridors program. And in the back of the report you'll see a list of corridors that this money has nominally been allocated to. Now, the advocacy at the moment is focusing primarily on securing state funding, because you'll see all but the Glenroy Road corridor, which is council's corridor, everything else is state-controlled road. So it's really of great benefit to the state. But you know, at the moment we're still working on that 80%, 20% split. So the majority of that 20% split would be coming from the state government, and we need to see that basically included in the next state budget for that program to go ahead. To date, some time ago, the Glenroy Road project got nominated as part of this Beef Roads corridor, and to date, in any discussions I've been having with the Beef Corridors group, I have been working on the basis that it would still be an 80%, 20% split, but being our corridor, it would be 80% feds, 20% council funding. I suppose in dollar terms, the ramifications of that, under the Beef Corridors program, we're seeking $15 million, 12 of which would come from state, 3 would have to come out of council's budget. Now, at the moment, as opposed to the ROSI program, where funds have been allocated, currently we do not have any additional funds to support the Beef Corridors program in our long-term financial forecast. Now, what has also become evident is that $400 million that has been allocated through the federal government doesn't really kick into 25-26. So normally they've allocated $50 million in 25-26, and then a single column that says onwards. So there's another $350 million after 25-26 to be spent on that program. We don't know much about the program. They haven't given us much in the way of guidelines, and there's no real clear indication as to what time frame the federal government want to spend their $350 or $400 million over. In leading up to the federal elections and federal budgets, the Beef Corridors Group were pushing for a 6 to 7 year delivery program. And that was based around, I suppose, in some regards, a lot of the Central and Western councils are wanting to secure a fair portion of that work to keep their workforces going. It was more about what they could deliver out in those areas based on the resources they have available to them. Now, what that does mean for us, I suppose, is that given we've got this ROSI program, which really kicks in around about now and takes us through to about 27-28, probably provides the opportunity of then continuing on with that program to see the remainder of Glenroy Road addressed from about that 27-28, nominally for 6-7 years onwards, so kicking almost out to 233, I think I might have had in there. So what I was trying to achieve there in the long-term financial forecast and onwards was spreading that $3 million of council money over about a 6-year period. So it becomes about $500,000 a year, matched by the federal government's $2 million. So you've got $2.5 million a year project, which I think is quite a deliverable package of works by our rural crews. It's probably very similar to what we saw happen on Thirsty Creek Road, that level of work. So it was trying to balance that out as well. So that's where I'm, but to date, my assumptions around an 80-20 split and whether council's happy with that are really only my assumptions at the moment. So that's why I'm really just seeking some direction to make sure council are happy for me to continue working with the Queensland Beef Corridors Group around that basis of an 80-20 split, with essentially back-ending council's expenditure towards the end of our long-term financial forecast and even to the start of the next 10 years. That's essentially my report, so I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Martin. It's one that's had its ups and downs, peaks and troughs, and it's still continuing on. But the importance for those roads, as in the Beef Corridor roads, to our major processors and the sale yards are critical, making sure that livestock's getting to the dinner plate. So, and being the beef capital, it's something there that we're quite keen to be seen to be in support of our rural our outback councils as well. But we've got to be mindful of our own projects and the delivery of those in a timely manner, but making sure that funding's there as well. But also promoting the Lower Fitzroy Food Bowl and the opportunities that could come from that as well. I think they're dual servicing, as well as those upgrades for our local producers and primary producers in those local areas as well. So I think there's a longer term benefit if you include that in there as well. So I'll hand over to Portfolio Councillor Smith, just to ask some questions there. Thanks, Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, this is great news, and definitely, Martin, I would like you to stay in there and the Beef Corridors project ongoing. Look, this is a really important link between Rockhampton and the north. When it floods, it can be out for up to a month afterwards, that crossing, and a lot of cattle actually go north instead of coming back to our meatworks. But also a lot of people use that road as a shortcut north rather than go the highway, and a lot of our residents actually go out to Glenroy crossing to get away from all the city, and, fishing staying out there for a while. And look, you know, this is just music to my ears. I couldn't believe it when I read it. I thought it was all gone, the funding, and to think that it is still there. And I'm hoping that we can commit to that 20% funding to get that built, because it is really, really an important link. And these people have put up with a really substandard road for a long time. And with that bitumen and the upgrade of that river crossing, can only be beneficial for everybody, for our economy especially.
Yeah, you're right, Councillor Smith. It is something there. We tend to be rowing our own boat a little bit in the beef corridors area, because it is it's different to the state control road. So that is something we need to make sure that we've got that in concrete with the Beef Road Corridor Group, that we've got our own project management of that project, but aligning with the funding from the state and making sure it's that 80-20% split that we still need to do. But the advocacy from that group has been quite strong, and you know, that's been well recognised in federal parliament and state parliament as well. So that's some of the benefits of that combined advocacy that you're able to see working together in partnerships. Thanks, Councillor Smith. I'll go over to Councillor Rutherford and then Deputy Mayor Councillor Fisher.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and really exciting to see this sitting here, and as you've said, and Councillor Smith, you know, just the importance of this corridor for us as a region now, particularly with Rookwood and you know, the growth we're hoping that will bring to the region. You know, this is a key link to that. What councillors probably aren't necessarily aware of is that Blue and I were at the ratepayers meeting last night, and we were just double checking some things. So that the floodway as it stands at the moment has only not had water over it for about, they've only been able to cross twice in 6 months. So it is basically constantly underwater, the way things are at the moment. There is a significant washout on the other side of the river underneath, which we can't really get to inspect or anything else until it's clear of water. And they believe that there is a significant gap. It's like the concrete sheet has lifted up and moved, and they believe there is a significant gap in the concrete panels, I guess, that make up that floodway. So until we can actually, there's no water and we can get out there and have a look, we don't know what sort of damage is sitting there as it stands, you know. There's been a lot of good work at the moment. We had great feedback on the work that's been done on Glenroy Road already, and how much of a difference that has made to that community. But I have been there times, the amount of heavy vehicle usage that it gets now. And I've been there, and I believe it was with Dan on one particular time where the undercarriage of our cars, the ruts from the wheel tracks were so deep that the undercarriage of the cars were dragging along. So basically we had to drive straddled, and in a lot of places it's only just wide enough for, you know, that vehicle. So I think the reason we don't hear more about it is because it's a fairly self-sufficient community. When someone gets stuck, one of the property owners go and get their piece of machinery, pull them out and send them on their way. But you know, it does has had some significant issues, and to see something like this come along would be fabulous. The other thing we did discuss with the community last night was about the bridge, you know, what height bridge, you know, and things like that. And they were very clear in that they don't see that a duplication of Riversley Bridge is what they need at all. In actual fact, they're saying it makes no sense to build something like that because it floods either side, so you can't get to the bridge. So it doesn't matter that the bridge is out of water if you can't actually get to it because the road's cut off either side. And the comment was that there would be a sweet spot where a bridge would sit that would probably keep it out of the majority of water, so that for the long-term stability of the bridge, it's out of water, And it may go under from time to time, but for 80% of the time, for 60% of the time, for whatever that sweet spot is, it gives the majority of people access across there. They're not looking for a duplication of Riversley Bridge at all. In actual fact, I'd probably prefer a 2-lane than a 1-lane at a lower height, and particularly given often you get those big harvest machines that need to be able to get across it. That needs to be taken into consideration as well. But yeah, very, very, very exciting if we can get this to fruition. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Rutherford. I'm looking at Martin there about the bridge design and the scale and scope of that. I'm not sure whether we've gone into that high level detail, but I'm sure the costing may have been equivalent to what the Riversley Bridge was. And again, but that Riversley Bridge has been designed to go underwater as well, so it's not. It's such a massive system, the Fitzroy, that those areas experience high level of flooding, and it's a percentage of the time that it's out of water that's an improvement to those graziers and property owners in the area as well.
Just through the Chair, just if I could add to that, yeah, certainly at the time of the funding submission, it was based around a body of work that had been done by Sunwater at the time, based on the level they would need to raise the bridge to be above Edenban. We are raising stage 3. Now, whether stage 3 is ever going to go ahead is a question. Certainly the current EIS, I think, covers them for stage 2. But I certainly agree with Councillor Rutherford that there's going to be some sweet spot, and we've already started having discussions around whether a lower level 2-lane would be a better outcome than certainly a higher single lane. So, yeah, that sort of options analysis is our next step. So we now need to, once we get a funding agreement signed, start into that project development and have those, ask those questions and come up with what we believe should be the best solution.
That's the Edenban is the big part of this one, and that's what I wanted to make sure that this project's part of there, because water's going to be critical going forward, and that's my push and the council's direction is that we support that Edenban project, and we've been able to get the EIS extension. This will be another step in that path of getting a business case to look at Edenban to get that raised as well, and providing security but also opportunities. Thanks very much, Martin. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to actually talk on within the report, in particular the beef corridors, and I always in the back of my mind have been concerned that too much effort is put on the Tambo to Springshaw Road, and to the detriment of the Capricorn Highway and those areas that feed on the highway. And it is important that we need to keep pushing that the primary road, highway, for traffic, whether it be heavy vehicle or the movement of cattle, is the Capricorn Highway, and it's linked basically now from Perth through the Outback Way to Rockhampton is so important. And we also need those feeder roads, and you'll notice on that report there was also the Alpha Tambo to get that Barcoo beef to Rockhampton, that saving of the cattle coming through that road rather than going on the current bitumen roads. It's more economic for those graziers to actually send their cattle to Toowoomba and Brisbane. So we've got not just it's the highways, but there's a lot of economic benefit for us supporting some of these roads and promoting it. The same as the May Downs Road. If we could get and keep pushing that May Downs Road is important, that would get a lot more traffic within the resource community as well as the agricultural community. Rather than going to Mackay, May Downs Road then actually makes it more attractive for that Middlemount through to Capella agriculture to actually come back to Rockhampton. So there are, within that report, there are other parts that would actually boost Rockhampton's economy and help with the our agricultural corridors. So within that report, I think we've got to sort of also keep highlighting that a couple of those projects are more important for our region than seeing a large amount of money spent between Tambo and Springsure and then on to Gladstone. So, going to keep banging that drum.
We've got to push those projects as well. How successful we'll be is another opportunity to see how we'll go in that space as well. But we'll take that on note, Martin, to put that up at our meetings with the Beef Corridors Group as we go forward. Okay, councillors, I think we've exhausted that report. Councillor Smith, are you happy to move? Councillor Rutherford, happy to second. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Martin. We'll move on to our next one, the 10.4, the Remote Roads Upgrade Pilot Program. Again, Martin, thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. This is another federally funded program that seemingly popped out of nowhere not long before the federal election. It's one we hadn't dealt with before and had some pretty unique or specific type requirements or criteria met around lengths of unsealed roads on particular corridors for the road to be able to qualify. We started going down the track with this particular one because Glenroy Road in itself really fit the bill with this particular program quite well. But as we were developing that particular submission, the federal government advised us, well, no, we can't actually put that one in. We've already secured some funding for Glenroy Road under the ROSI campaign. So we did an assessment of a number of roads, and Stanwell-Warilla was probably the next best fit for the funding submission. So I suppose with the short time frame, what the idea was that we would put this together and send it away, and then I would come retrospectively and ask Council's permission to put the submission in. Now, somewhere between then and now, I've missed that. So I'm here hat in hand looking for a retrospective approval for the funding submission, which we've been successful in gaining. So essentially we've, with no additional budget required from Council, been able to pick up $2.1 million worth of work on the Stanwell-Warilla Road, which in itself is an important corridor, I think, to our rural areas, and certainly feeding those Alton Downs sort of areas and across to Stanwell, and provides an alternate flood access when Ridgeland Road's under at particular times. And it's a corridor that has enjoyed a level of support from Council in the past, and we've been successful with a number of funding submissions throughout the years on getting little bits done on that. So I think this is a good win for Council. So hat in hand, I'm just asking for a retrospective approval before we enter into a funding agreement on it. The money we'd had is put in the budget. It's already there.
I think you've sold it, Martin. I don't think you're going to have one too many objections to it. But funnily enough, we covered that road the other day, myself and Councillor Fisher. We ended up out at Stanwell where we needed to be in Alton Downs. So we had to scoot across, and we got first hand after rounding up a few head of cattle on the way. But I'll go to the portfolio spokesperson, Councillor Smith, and then Councillor Rutherford. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Again, this is music to my ears as well. Really important link between two highways. Lots of families living on the Stanwell-Warilla Road, more blocks being taken up, and great to see. The only question I've got, Martin, when I went to school it was 2,240 chains in a mile. Is that still right?
I'll take that on notice, Councillor.
And I'm just sort of wondering where it is, because there is a fair bit of bitumen from Stanwell, and I know we've had to widen a lot of it. So we're replacing one floodway, widening 11 minor culverts, which is really great. But I'm wondering, are we going to heighten some of them as well? Because they're so low, some of them, and they're tiny little just dips in the road in places. So that's a really, really good project, what we're going to do. And one major culvert. And is it 5 kilometres of actual new bitumen, or are we widening the bitumen? It's just that we do get a lot of complaints from the Dalma end, and this is all the Stanwell end. And I think it was back in previous council days, we used to do one project at the Stanwell end, one on the Dalma end, to keep everybody happy. But we have done more work on the Stanwell end. Obviously, that there's more vehicles use that section.
Yeah, I'll let
So I
Martin
just
answer.
wondered if you could just enlighten me a little bit on that. Thanks.
I suppose in very general terms, the basis of submission was really continuing the bitumen from the Stanwell end and joining. There was one isolated section of bitumen, so we were basically trying to join from the existing bitumen through to some bitumen that was further out around Chainage. I can't even read that with my glasses on. And it was also to address, I think, a safety concern towards the Delmer end, where I think there was a curve that basically needed widening that was quite abrupt, and we've had complaints about that. So that was essentially the basis of the submission. Was really it's really coming from the Stanwell end.
Mm-hmm.
You're really great. I'm happy with that. You guys know what you're doing, and yeah, just really, really good news.
Mm. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Councillor Smith. Councillor Rutherford.
Oh, thanks, Mr Mayor. I was just checking the date. I thought it must be my birthday today or something. So, yeah, really good. I guess similar comments to Councillor Smith. I'd certainly had far more people contact me about issues on the Delmer end of Stanwell-Warilla Road, so I was curious as to, why we went where we did. That said, I'm happy. I'm just happy that we're getting something done. But then the one point that Councillor Smith did make, and that roads can sometimes cut off for a number of hours from some of those floodways.
Mm.
So I don't know whether there's room to lift some of them so it is sort of open all the time.
Through the chair, that's probably something we need to look at now. I mean, we went with a very general scope. We now need to develop that scope more, and whether we can possibly raise a number of those little culvert crossings is something we can certainly look at.
Yeah.
But it was really just a very general scope and a general costing at this point in time.
Yeah.
So we'll get as much as we can for the money.
Yeah, no, thank you. Just the importance of it during flood time as a connector can't be understated, really.
No.
And we've been fairly lucky that most of our floods have been in dry weather once they're here. But if we happen to, have flood and then a pile of rain, then that community all along Alton Downs, Ridgelands and area would be cut off because that road is cut also.
Culverts. Yeah, no, I get that, and I think that's always, future funding opportunities as well that we don't miss out on as well. Okay, Martin, I think that's exhausted all the questions on that report. Again, Councillor Smith, happy to move as portfolio spokesman, and again, Councillor Rutherford, second that. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, that brings us to the end of our agenda items on the infrastructure report for this morning. Any urgent business or questions? If not, I'll close the meeting. Thank everyone for your attendance, and thank the officers for their reports. Councillor.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join